Welcome to another edition of Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President, Local 237 Teamsters. With us once again, very special guest, our Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Kirsten Gillibrand has won re-election. She has been a United States Senator since 2009. Before that, she was an upstate Congresswoman. As a working mother, Senator Gillibrand understands the needs of working families and made them a top priority in her office. Senator Gillibrand's home is in Albany, New York, where she grew up. She and her husband, Jonathan, have two boys, Theo and Henry, and a Labradoodle, Maple. Welcome back to Reaching Out.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Greg.
When I first met you, you had two small children, and we don't get old, they just get older.
That's true.
And bigger. So I know they must be in college now.
Yeah, Theo's a junior in college and Henry's a junior in high school.
Oh,
So
yeah.
and Henry's 16, which is the length of my public service since I had him during my first term in Congress.
Wow. So he's grown up in politics.
Yep, he sure has. And
Okay.
both boys hope to do public service someday. So that's a good sign. I hope they do it.
Oh, very good. Excellent. Well, they have you to guide them, so they can't go wrong. So you just won your third full term in the United States Senate. Of course, you've been here since 2009. Looking over your Senate career so far, what are your highlights?
Well, the bill I'm proudest of is the 9/11 health bill. We've passed that 3 times with lots of fixes along the way to make sure that our first responders and our family members who live at ground zero have access to life-saving health care because of all the toxins they breathed in when they answered the call of duty and served not only on 9/11, but for the weeks and months thereafter, cleaning up the pile. That was really important to me to stand with our first responders and community members to fight for them. And hopefully the last piece of that bill will be somehow in this end of year CR. It might be up in the air right now, but I'm hopeful that the last formula change we needed and the last bit of money is prevailing. I also got a bill done that took me the last 12 or so years to get done, which was my gun trafficking bill. When I met with a family who had lost their daughter to a stray bullet right before she was graduating from high school, on her way to college, on her way to UPenn, and she died. So I wrote a piece of legislation making gun trafficking a federal crime. And we finally passed that last year, and we combined it with $1 billion in mental health money for violence disruption. And so far, we've confiscated over 3,000 weapons. We are prosecuting over 300 traffickers. Over 100 have been convicted already. So that was a meaningful piece of legislation that I think is making our community safer. I also have fought for our veterans and our service members. We've reformed the military justice system to protect people who have been sexually assaulted, raped, or murdered. We also, with rights and justice, we also passed a bill to protect those service members exposed to burn pits. Again, similar toxins to the ones emitting from 9/11 from the pile are similar to the toxins that get emitted from burn pits. So now they have access to healthcare. That's going to affect 3 million veterans. And then I've done a lot on ethics reforms and transparency. I worked on the Stock Act that made members of Congress have to disclose if they buy or sell stocks. I'm working now with Josh Hawley to ban them entirely. So I do a lot on ethics reforms and sunlight. And then last, I do a lot on workplace reforms to help people in the workplace. Higher pay. I lead the Workers' Bill of Rights for service workers, for home health aides, for anybody who does, often tipped work. So we want to make sure that we eliminate the tipped wage and have a higher minimum wage. So I do a lot for workers there. And I also do fight for workers who are discriminated in the workplace, whether sexually harassed or assaulted. I changed 30 million employment contracts, giving people a right of action to sue in a court of law and not have to do mandatory arbitration. I did that with Lindsey Graham. We're teaming up right now to do workplace protections for older people who are discriminated because of their age. So I'm hoping to get that done, hopefully in the new Congress, if I can't get it done at the year end.
So that's a lot. That's a lot to unpack. But what I want to ask you about was the 9/11 bill. Was that the original Zagroga bill?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And we've updated it every 5 years to make sure all the relevant diseases are covered, to make sure the money's actually getting paid, to make sure there's enough money for compensation and healthcare. And so we've continued to refine the program every few years to make it stronger and better and more responsive to the needs of our first responders and community members.
Wow. I remember that bill. You know, the further we got away from September 11th, 2001, the less people remembered and the less they felt that they had to take care of the first responders who responded that day. And I noticed that the fight got, I would say, more intense, where you even had Jon Stewart come there and help out with the bill.
Yes, he did. And then Jon Stewart and John Field helped us in passing the Veterans Bill about the burn pits, because they recognized the diseases as the same and so wanted to help the veterans community after we passed the 9/11 health bill a few times.
Yes, I remember that. And it's something to say that you ask people to do a job for you, and then when something happens to them, you walk away from them. That's not a message.
Just not right. And that's not who we are as Americans. So it's a bill that always gets strong bipartisan support. And often we pass it unanimously.
Any big changes you noticed in how the Senate functions from when you started?
Well, you know, interestingly, Greg, it's always been bipartisan for me. I've always worked across the aisle on every piece of legislation I just described. I had strong Republican support every time on the 9/11 health bill, different leads every year. The Stock Act, Republican support. Gun trafficking, John Cornyn from Texas, Republican support. Marco Rubio on the burn pits. And so, you know, the news media really only covers the divide and covers the disagreements. But in fact, all the legislation I've ever passed and the laws I've ever made are because I've worked on a bipartisan basis. So I think the Senate is still a strong place and a place where good things can get done.
Could you explain to us how it is, what a coordinated campaign is?
Sure.
What's the difference, a coordinated campaign?
So as you know, 2 years ago, we had a tough election year. Lee Zeldin ran for governor and spent $50 million on negative ads, telling the state that it was unsafe, Democrats weren't good leaders, and that it was our fault. That resonated with a lot of people. And so they felt like Democrats didn't have their back in some meaningful way. And as a consequence, we lost 5 House seats. So since I was the only statewide person running last cycle, I decided early on, 2 years out, that I wanted to fix that issue because I felt like voters didn't have enough information. And because all they heard was negative information, they stayed home. We had the worst voter turnout in a decade. So I worked with Governor Hochul and Hakeem Jeffries to build our first ever state and federal coordinated campaign. It really was effective. We raised about $8 million and we invested in full-time staff to do grassroots organizing. We had 40 offices in 7 battleground districts. We hired 150 staff. We had 23,000 volunteers. And with all that support, we knocked on 1.3 million doors and we made over 5 million phone calls. And the consequence of that was voters were engaged. In every one of these districts, we were reaching close to 1 million voters. And so they knew by election day that their voice and their votes mattered. Well, sorry, we didn't reach 1 million voters in every election district. We made 1 million contacts in each election district, meaning the 200,000 voters got 5 contacts, which is
Right.
enough to convince somebody that their voice matters and that their vote matters. And it's also enough to have been engaged in the community over 2 years. So you're not just showing up on election day saying we want your vote, but you're showing up 2 years before election day saying, what are your issues? What are you concerned about? How can we help? And that really informed our candidates. And so we ran on public safety issues, top of mind. We ran on economic issues, cost of groceries, cost of housing, cost of healthcare. And the candidates that ran on those issues won. So we won 5 out of 7 of the battleground districts as a result. And it should be a model for how we run campaigns across the country.
Excellent, excellent. How did all this come together? And whose idea was it?
It was my idea.
Okay.
And it came together because our great governor and our great minority leader, Hakeem Jeffries, decided this was a good idea. And so together we raised the money and got it done. The governor raised most of the money. She raised $5 million out of that 8. Hakeem and I each raised about 1.5. And that was enough. 8 million was enough to have that many offices, that many staff, that many people volunteering, and that much voter contact. We did Black, Latino, AAPI outreach. We had organizers on every one of the 16 college campuses in those districts, and getting students to vote really mattered. It was literally the margin of difference for winning some of these seats. So getting young people to understand that their voice and their vote really did matter.
So how do you think you could take this model nationally, and how do you think you would do in
So
future
one
national
of the
election?
things that I'm hoping to work on are some of the Senate races around the country. And for each of the states where we have a chance of winning a Senate seat, I will work with them to make sure they have resources so they can do coordinated campaigns, so they can engage statewide with other stakeholders and other candidates to really organize on the ground, to have offices, to have volunteers, to have full-time staff, to have a student outreach program, to have a Black and Latina and AAPI outreach program, to talk to older voters, to really make sure voters in those states know that their voices matter. And so I hope to do that in some of these key battleground states next year.
Very good, very good. So what is your message to those voters? And regardless of party affiliation, how can Washington help keep Americans feeling safe and also lessen their economic anxieties?
So safety is really important. I think people got stressed out by the flux in immigration and the number of migrants that were on New York City street corners. They were very anxious about young migrants attacking police officers. Those stories were in the news all day long. And so they got very nervous. And they're also nervous and upset about gun violence. They're upset about the fentanyl trafficking and kids overdosing because they don't know they're even taking fentanyl. Those are the areas of biggest concern. So what's important for Democrats is to focus on it, to talk about it. What are you doing on immigration to stop the flow? How are you creating a legal immigration system? What are you doing to make sure people who commit violent crimes are sent home? Those are issues they wanted to hear our views on. And if you don't talk about it, they don't know what you stand for, and they'll just believe what your opponent's saying about you. On public safety, they also want to know that we're getting illegal guns off the streets. That's why passing that gun trafficking bill and doing these prosecutions is making a difference. Every gun you take off the street, that could be one life saved. Or many lives saved. They want to know you're doing something about the international cartels trafficking fentanyl into our country. So talking about what you've done, what you want to do, and really communicating that you care about these issues, that you're focused on it. Second, on the economy, Democrats did a lot to try to help the economy, but the money isn't yet spent. So, for example, we got deals for getting prescription drug prices down. We capped insulin at $35 a month. We negotiated in bulk for the top 10 drugs seniors take, but those top 10 drugs lower prices don't start till 2026. So nobody saw that. Nobody knew that we'd already done a big thing that would make a big difference. So you have to explain that you're working really hard to get these costs down, and then recognize that when people can't afford to feed their kids, they're not going to be as focused on the other issues that you might care about. They won't be as focused on democracy issues or LGBTQ issues or literally any other issue if they can't put food on the table. And so there was just a misperception that we weren't caring about the economy and we weren't doing things to get costs down, whereas in fact we were. And we passed two big bills on jobs to build infrastructure, to build semiconductors, and to have US made manufacturing. But that money doesn't flow for the whole next 10 years. So again, they couldn't see the jobs being created in their backyard because the Micron plant hasn't been built yet. And the money for, rail and roads and sewers isn't been spent yet. So that's the challenge. We did good things, but it didn't show yet. And so you have to explain to people that you do care, you do recognize they're struggling, and that you have done meaningful things, and you're going to keep working on it because their life and their struggles are real, and it's not enough. We haven't gotten enough done to make their lives better. So voters just need to know that you care and you're listening and that you understand their situation and that you agree that something needs to be done, and then tell them what you're doing.
You're listening to Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President, Local 237 Teamsters. With us once again, very special guest, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. And we're here talking about the Senate. And unfortunately, when you mentioned some of the things that was accomplished, 2026, next year is 2025. So we got a whole year before those things take place.
Before the money even flows.
Yeah. So progress takes time. So tell us some of the other things we can expect, because no one during the campaign, no one during this whole election season really took the time to tell Americans what they could expect in the future. And as I would say, some of our contracts that we negotiate with the union, it's the last year of the contract is probably the best year of the contract, because that's the cheapest way and the most you could get out of a contract, because you put it off to the end. So tell us, is there anything else we can expect that's good? I mean, the CHIPS Act, tell us about the CHIPS Act, because that job.
Huge jobs, and these will be union jobs. So for we've lost a lot of votes from union workers over the last 10 years because I think for a lot of union workers, they've told me that they got the sense Democrats weren't fighting hard enough for workers, weren't fighting hard enough for working people and the issues that they're worried about, because the news media will cover a lot of other issues. The news media is covering Gaza, or the news media is covering LGBTQ plus issues, or the news media is covering immigrants and crime. So they don't feel that anyone's talking about jobs and wages and protections for workers and made in America. But the truth is we were working really hard on those issues, but we often get pulled into conversations that are very, very important. But if someone doesn't hear you talking about higher wages and more workplace protections and getting the PRO Act on and building America back, they wonder if you care about it. And so the goal for me is we have to keep talking about our bread and butter issues all the time. So for example, the Made in America stuff is great. The Micron plant in Syracuse is going to be the size of 10 football fields. Thousands of workers are going to be required to build it, and thousands of workers are going to be required to work there. The same is true in the Albany, Schenectady, Troy area. We're going to have a huge investment at Global Foundries. $1.5 billion, I think, dollars is going in for that. We're also building supercomputers and AI all across the tech sector in upstate New York and the Hudson Valley. We're building roads, bridges, sewers, high-speed rail, better electric grid, better energy infrastructure, wind plus solar plus water power. All of that is going to be funded over the next 10 years, which is really going to benefit New York and union labor. And so these are just things that we have been working on, and that money is going to flow over 10 years. It's going to be over $1 trillion spent over the next 10 years on infrastructure alone. Another something like $200 billion on energy infrastructure, another $200 billion on regular infrastructure. That's going to, again, translate to higher wages and jobs for a very long time.
Can you tell us where this high-speed rail will be built? I'm interested.
There's a bunch of projects. So the line that everybody wants, that they want to not only invest in, but they want to do, is New York to Washington, D.C. But the second line that I'm desperate to build is New York City up to Canada, going to Albany, straight to Montreal, crossing over from Albany to Buffalo, and going straight to Toronto. That line has so much potential, but it will need investment. It needs government investment to match the private sector. So public-private partnerships for those investments would be so effective and meaningful. Part of the challenge with high-speed rail is you need straight corridors. And you can't have curves. And Amtrak right now has probably too many curves. So some of the private investors that I've met with want to go underground because if you do a tunnel, you can make it straight and you can go super fast. So that's an idea. Also for the Hudson Valley line, the places that are too curved, you might be able to use the 87 corridor. You might be able to use other corridors that are now being used for commerce, not for passenger rail. So there's lots of ideas, but that's the vision. And there's money now for states to do these bigger projects. California has a bunch of projects they want to do, from airports to the population centers in Los Angeles. They have a bunch of different places they want to do it. We also have ideas for light rail. So the light rail idea is to have light rail in Brooklyn, to go along the waterfront, several stops to link communities that aren't currently linked, so people don't have to get on the BQE or other major highways that cause a lot of pollution and take a lot of time. We also have an idea for light rail in Staten Island, just to take you again along the waterfront to get where you need to go, because they don't have a lot of public transportation. So there's a lot of big ideas out there that the state can look at about what's the biggest bang for their buck and where do they want to spend their infrastructure money.
Okay. Unfortunately, many of the Supreme Court's recent decisions have stacked the deck in favor of big corporations. We have about 2 minutes. What are your ideas on how to fix the court?
Well, they need an ethics code. The fact that Justice Scalia took, I don't know how many dozens of junkets. He died when he was on one of the junkets in Montana or Wyoming. The fact that Clarence Thomas has taken so many junkets, almost all his vacations are paid for by people who have business in front of the court. They don't disclose who's paying for their vacations. They don't disclose the vacations themselves. They don't disclose when they have conflicts of interest. And so first of all of that needs to be disclosed. They need to do the same disclosures members of Congress have. They should be banned from buying and selling stocks because they are most likely engaging in trading on non-public information. And last but not least, we should have term limits for justices. I think if you could instill an 18 or 20-year term limit, impose it for the Congress as well. It's what's good for the goose is good for the gander. They should have all the same ethics rules and term limits.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. Now, how would this get started? Because Congress has the ability to do that.
Yeah, we would need to pass a law that requires them to follow the same ethics code as Congress. And then we would need to pass a law about term limits, which I really want to work on. I've been working with Josh Hawley on some of these issues, banning stock trading, for example. I've been working with Ted Cruz on term limits. So I'm hoping in the new Congress I can get to work with them again on these issues.
It's going to be tough. It's an uphill battle, but I hope.
Yeah, but it would definitely depoliticize the court, and it would make it more accountable to the people.
Yes, I really hope you're able to do that. We have 1 more minute. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you would really like to say before we have to sign off?
I would just say that in the new Congress, I hope to get done a national paid leave bill. I think that would help working people enormously to have it nationally, to have it for all life events. I think that would be extremely meaningful. I also hope to continue to work on workplace reforms, higher pay, better benefits. I want to get that age discrimination bill done. I want to do a strategic plan for aging. I'm going to be the ranking member on the aging committee. So for everybody who's getting older, which is all of us, I want to make sure we're not discriminated against and have opportunities and have the ability to age in place and live our fullest lives.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for this edition of Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President Local 237, and a very special guest, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Thank you for coming back on Reaching Out. I know your schedule is busy. Thank you for making the time.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.